My name is Javier Lorente, and I am the training leader of 333 and the 333 P Academy. It's a pleasure to be here today, this evening in Spain, with more than 500 people registered in the webinar. We are already now almost 200 people inside, and more people will be coming. So it's amazing how all the people that we have inside and we are going to have in this webinar, and we are really happy as well because we have people from more than 52 countries right now in the webinar. So I'm going first to do and to present our expert here today, Denis. Good evening. Thank you to be here.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Okay, I will present you in a moment, but let me just in one moment to share my screen, because I want to present. I imagine that you can see my screen right now. Okay, so this is all the people that we have right now, the different countries that we have now registered inside the webinar. So we are really happy to have people from almost, I don't know, a lot of countries in the world. So 52 countries from Asia, from Europe, from America. So thank you to be here this evening. I'm going to stop now sharing my screen, and I'm going to present our expert here today. So Denis is an economist. He has been collaborating, I think, with 333 since 2013 or something like that, and we hope to continue having you with us for a longer time. So Denis and his business partner that he told me that is his son-in-law. So the economist as well, Lance Mulberry. So he consults globally with leading production companies, processors, pharmaceutical companies, genetics companies, and others in the global port chain. Their practice is limited to those firms which are willing to make a long-term commitment to transforming their process to next generation, precision agricultural concepts, and they utilize the use advanced bioeconomic modelings, artificial intelligence, and other techniques to help bring precision, innovation, optimization to their clients. So Denis, I hope not to have lived too many things, and it's a pleasure really to have you here with us this evening. Thank you for taking the time, and it's a pleasure again for 333 and his training area, the Peak Academy, to organize this webinar for all of you. Remember that during the webinar, you can write down your questions in a specific area that is designated for that, okay? And then at the end of the webinar, we will have some time to give or to ask these questions to Denis. And remember as well that this webinar, we will record the webinar. So probably next week we will put the webinar in our platform, and in the platform, so all the people that will want to review and see the webinar again will be able to do it. Denis, I'm going to share to leave you now the control of the webinar. first of all, you can do a little bit, or you can tell us whatever you want, and at the same time, I'm going to give you the control of your presentation. Okay, can you hear me, Denis?
I can.
Can you share your screen right now? Perfect. Okay, so it's now your screen there. So I'm going to switch off my camera and my microphone, and I leave you alone down there, but I will be in the back.
Great. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and I want to welcome everybody to the webinar and thank you for taking the time to join in today. I have told Rosa, who is my primary contact at 333, that the tremendous job that they have done with the website made it so that I didn't have to try to create a website for the pork industry. I highly recommend that you visit there. You'll see that they're very data intensive, very informative, and lots of good articles, research articles, as well as a complete scan in many languages of the global situation. So let's begin today with the topic that I've been asked to address, which is what are the prospects for pork production and the market after COVID-19? I haven't used this picture on the left very much lately, but it's a great time to bring it back. It's a painting by Salvador Dali that our friends in Spain, I'm sure, will be very familiar with. And it's a picture of St. Anthony there in the corner, naked and holding up the cross. And it's a picture of the various temptations when he went out into the desert to meditate. According to the legend, the devil sent these horrible temptations toward him. And I always thought it was a great picture of him representing the pork industry and the challenges which come at it seemingly every year. And they're more grotesque and large and challenging, it seems like, as we move on. You can see the elephant in the very far background. There's already one way out there in our future ready to turn the corner and kind of come at us. So Dali, I think, captured the current situation. I think many of you have probably read the book that talks about black swans. They're really unanticipated events that cause tremendous disruption. And certainly in the swine industry, the appearance and spread of African swine fever closely followed 1 year later by the spread of the COVID-19 disease, the particular SARS virus in humans, has led to a double punch, really, in the gut of many pork producers throughout the world. Of course, some in places in the world have been better off. Some have been dramatically damaged, but over time, we're going to see that disruption is going to come to all. Even those who received initial potential benefits are going to find it challenging in the later stages of this. So we might ask ourselves, are there new dynamics that are associated with these two black swans that are going to shape the world, especially for meat producers and pork producers, in what I'm labeling here a pandemic saturated world? Well, we can look kind of in a quick glance at where pork is produced throughout the world. And we might ask ourselves, how likely is this to shift related to the pandemics, both in swine and in humans that we've seen? And I would suggest to you that the location of swine production is changing some, but not primarily related to these dynamics. It's primarily related to shifting conflicts with urban areas and the location of swine production initially in areas which were not able to profitably use or dispose of the manure nutrients. So if we look at the things which drive production location, we'll see that really most of these are not affected by the pandemics. We really like to see land which has low value for other competitive purposes as a good place to have swine. It can't be near national parks or urban areas or where people have lots of vacation homes. It has to be out and away from other competing uses. It needs to be in an area that can economically use manure nutrients. So generally speaking, it needs to be near cropping systems because disposing of manure is really impossible long term or very difficult and costly to do if it's not placed on crops. It needs infrastructure that's adequate to take the pigs from these locations to final demanders, whether they're local or, in this case, infrastructure to support rail, truck, and deep river or ocean ports to export. We need land that's close to low-cost production of grain or oil seeds. However, if the demand is high enough in large production systems, ocean-going barges can even bring grain at low cost to them. But generally speaking, pigs locate where grain is cheap. The location, though it must be remote, can't be so remote that people don't want to live there. There's nothing to do. I have been to a hog operation in Canada, in the western part of Canada, that literally is 10 miles from the nearest residence or any sign of human beings. So everybody has a 10-mile drive every day to get to the farm who works there. And because of the isolation, it's very difficult to keep high quality managers and workers there. It has to be located near modern information systems, especially as they become more important in precision management and data transfer that are coming to our systems and are already in some. And it has to be at a place where it supports consumption as a primary product. In other words, the size is going to be very limited if the only motive is exportation. There needs to be a local demand to support it. If we look at where pork is consumed, you'll recognize that the same colored areas of consumption are where the production was. So pigs, by and large, even though there is a very active import-export business in pig meat, the vast majority of pigs are produced where they are consumed. Many countries, though, are able to export close to 50% of their total production and sometimes more, but generally speaking, it's pigs are produced where they are consumed. So the question becomes, will what has happened in these black swan events affect consumption? So what are the factors that drive pork consumption? Well, certainly historically, it's been the multidimensional use of the animal, its ability to eat the waste of humans, at least in the past. So it became kind of a great way to dispose of human waste and garbage and return from that meat for consumption, as well as producing manure nutrients for fertilization. Of course, that cycle has largely been reduced in the world because the consumption of garbage and other products are certainly not recommended today. But if we look at where pork originally located, it was for these motives. Certainly, the consumption of pork follows social, cultural, and religious traditions. We know that during times of the year, pork as a food product is highly attached to certain celebrations. For instance, in China, the largest producer and consumer of pork, two main periods, but lots of other periods dominate consumption. The national days in early October and the New Year in late January, February are huge pork consumption times. Certainly in many Hispanic cultures, near the end of the year or during certain religious festivals, the consumption of pork meat is very high. And in the United States, the barbecue season, especially the summer, is a big consumer demand period. Pork has always sort of taken this middle ground between beef, which typically in the world is more expensive, and poultry, which is the least expensive. So it provides a kind of bridge between those two choices, and people usually blend some mix of these in their diet. It's kind of interesting. I don't know if anybody is watching from the COI cooperative in Mexico, but they have a very interesting approach in that Sonora area of Mexico where beef is very popular but expensive. So they literally fabricate the pork carcass in the same exact cuts as the beef carcass. And so it's marketed as a way to have less expensive beef, at least by appearance, on your plate. So it's a very creative kind of style. It's been very efficient as a producer of lots of meat for the combination of space, time, and cost. And having large litters a couple times a year has made it a big favorite to produce and to have. The variety in consumption that we talked about before helps pork demand when beef becomes very high priced, like it is now during this crisis, at least in the United States, and other protein sources. So people move around in their diet when prices change, and pork has fluctuated in that middle ground between beef and pork, offsetting their price increases on the family budget. The taste is very much appreciated, especially the taste which is contained in the fat, especially versus poultry, which tends to be very lean and requires a lot of seasonings to produce flavor. One of the factors which has come to the fore in recent times has been safety. So pork safety and the focus on not garbage feeding and removal of especially certain parasites which had been associated with pork as a brand for safety has been very important for consumers and has been affected by especially African swine fever. Because when it initially broke in China, there was a fear among many Chinese people about the zoonotic impact or zoonosis, which for the translators, the ability of the disease potentially to affect humans. But of course, African swine fever does not affect humans. But even when that's spoken on the news, many people like to wait and see and make sure that the information they're receiving is accurate. The structural model really for commodities, which has produced this tremendous collision, if you will, with these disrupting events, is the following. As pork production became less expensive through technological breakthroughs, there was a propensity then to attract investment and to drive scale to make the pork even cheaper and more attractive to customers. The Problem with that has been that it has induced a kind of a structural overproduction of pork in many countries, and certainly in the United States, that's the case, and has been for some time. Even though pork has been relatively profitable for several years now in the United States, probably since 2012, pork has been at least marginally profitable and in some years very profitable. There's always a tendency during those profitable periods to expand production and try to expand markets. And as technology increases and the ability to produce more animals per unit of space increases, their overproduction becomes a constant structuralized problem. Then, in order to reduce cost further, when size becomes very large, a kind of mutually destructive competition develops where the only focus is on lowering cost. And as that happens, people begin to imitate each other instead of bringing imitation. So we have a lot of benchmarking take place with the focus on matching others' costs rather than forward-looking and creating innovation. This causes a problem with market failure, and that's exacerbated by the fact that pork production at the production phase is a biological process which cannot be sped up or slowed down. So we know quite intimately in the United States and in a few places in the world that processors can immediately stop production, but producers cannot stop so quickly. They can feed different feeds that slow growth, and they can create environments which are not ideal to growth. But the only way to really stop production totally is to literally humanely euthanize the animals. So markets do not share the risk and in these situations equally in terms of flexibility. So this has been brought to the fore certainly in this, especially in the COVID epidemic. So risk management then, after these failures occur, begins to drive more coordination. And I expect to see over the next couple of years a kind of hardening of the chain to these kinds of external shocks. So we're going to see innovative ideas come to the fore to try to spread the risk and to reduce, never be able to eliminate, but reduce the production risk associated with these kinds of calamities. Because as we all know, the production phase has the greatest investment of any phase in the chain, but also shoulders the greatest risk because of its biological and inflexible production process. So production sector evolution is driven by these many black swan events, and here are some of the things that I think are likely to happen, are beginning to happen now. The cost of capital, which is to say the lending industry or the capital industry, is going to demand that there be more safety in the industry, or they're not going to continue investment. So the primary driver for change in the global pork chain coming out of these events is going to be the cost and availability of capital for people trying to do the same thing over and over again, or not learning the lessons of these shocks. They will not be receiving capital, or the cost of capital will be very high for non-innovative participants in the chain after these events. We feel, I think, that the packer must have a stake in production losses, especially from overproduction. So that is, generally speaking, especially in the United States, but in many other developed countries, and now in China, after the initial ASF event, driving increased integration so that the entire process comes under control and management of a single entity or a smaller group of participants, where people simply produce hogs and hope they can sell them at some point in the future is going to be disappearing. There's going to be a lot less of what I call the Wild West kind of expansion, which is a term from the history of the United States, where when settlers moved to the west in the country, when it was first being heavily populated, there was kind of a rush for development, and the rules were loose and so on. All of this is, I think, coming to a halt in the modern day animal production industry, not only pork, but the rest of them too. I think this situation is going to drive a much richer and larger uptake of precision agriculture methods, including the use of artificial intelligence for both forecasting, for optimization of processes, and to successfully manage these tremendous risks, which are now coming with more frequency and really with more tragic outcomes, not only for businesses, but in many cases for the animals themselves. I think we're going to see over time a large reduction in workers in both production and processing. Will be replaced by robotics. We've just heard recently in the news in the last few days that by analogy, we're seeing these same moves in other parts of the chain. For instance, the large retailer Walmart is trying to eliminate now all checkers from the stores. So the people who stand at the cash register and look at your items and plug in the price to total them up are being eliminated, because a disease process like this can not only injure them, but can cause a high variance in who shows up for work on any given day. And of course, this has been a tremendous problem in the packing plants in the United States and in both in Germany and Denmark and other places around the world. Whole plants and processors can be stopped in their tracks as humans become ill, and in many cases stopped for extended periods of time until the situation can be cleared. So we're going to see a lot less people involved in pork production. We're also likely to see, even though systems will be large, they're going to be more diverse and less subject to the domino effect. And the domino effect here I'm talking about is if one part of the system fails, all of the system fails. So we're going to see more heterogeneity or more parallel systems, even within large firms, which can take over when certain critical processes fail, kind of a backup or plan B and C. And part of that dynamic is the coming to the front of Latin America and Brazil. So I think we're going to see multinational production coordination, so that certain areas of the world that are taken out temporarily by disease, companies can either shift production or processing to other areas within country and beyond country borders to try to keep their customers in constant supply. One thing we've seen here in the United States, in my opinion, is that U.S. overproduction is still not conceded or agreed to. I think many people believe that things are just going to return to normal eventually, and if they hold on, will go on as before, and the great profitable opportunities in export markets will rise again, and everything will be okay. Just get through this short period of time. But I think, at least in my opinion, we have to decrease production by at least 2 to 5% in the United States to restore sustainable profitability. And as more of these safeguards come into place in the chain, so that processors and packers are not subject to complete shutdown, then the industry may be able to grow again. But at the present time, even though there is a huge demand for pork, there is not a very big demand for pigs in the United States because there are too many of them versus the processing capability. So the production sector is losing a tremendous amount of money at the present time, upwards of $40 a head in many cases, while the processing sector is very profitable because they are in a high demand situation. However, even their profitability is fluctuating now too. So they have to make a lot of investment in future stability and so forth. So it's not meant that I'm saying that somehow the processors are gaining huge windfalls while the producers are not. You may have seen this picture in Pig 333 if you follow my articles, but if you look at the colored lines that are going across the page, they're the first 31 weeks of the year for the last 5 years, but to include 2020. And basically, if you start at the bottom of those lines, you see the early years, less production, but that classic pattern of falling into the summer months as production slows down and temperatures rise. And then in the more recent years, you see the lines rising until we have the green line, which was this year's production, running at the beginning of the year a full, I believe, 5 to 6% above the previous year. And so tremendous numbers of pigs were coming to the market. Pigs were periodically challenging existing slaughter capacity even before COVID. So prices had been sort of tamped down or kept a little bit lower. And then suddenly you see the plunge in the green line when workers within the plant became ill and production lines had to be completely halted. And almost most of the plants, the major ones in the US, had this difficulty of closing, at least for short periods of time, or slowing their lines, and some of them were closed for 2 weeks or more. I think the first one to close was in Canada, Olymel, and then immediately after that in the United States. So we have what you're seeing there in the plunging of this line are the animals being processed, but the red line that's dotted at the top is tracing out the actual number of animals that are coming to market. So the gap between this plunging green line and the red one are the animals that are backed up on the farms. Many of those are being euthanized now. Nobody, I don't think, has an accurate number for them. Several producers have been very capable in slowing for a long period of time the growth of animals through feeding strategies and other unique ways that are unique to their situation. But many producers have had to, unfortunately, euthanize large numbers of pigs. And this includes those producers who are producing only wean pigs, because currently the market in the United States for wean pigs is next to nothing. And so there's very little ability to sell small pigs in a market where their future profitability is in big question. So if we look at what that situation might be in the coming months through the end of July, it really depends on how quickly packers come back to near normal production and how successful producers are to slow the growth of the animals and be able to maintain them for several weeks, really, until they can be marketed, either as sow markets potentially, although they can be easily overwhelmed. There are not many sow killers in the U.S. compared to total production, or barely make it in with large weights in the U.S. systems of processing. So if packers come back quickly, which they have, as I predicted they probably would, and producers, though very innovative in slowing, have not been perfect at that. The problem is, even if packers return to completely normal production, they have to exceed that to slaughter the backlogs of pigs. So exceeding their capacity without restriction from COVID problems is not going to happen. It'd be very unlikely that multiple shifts will be started in existing single shift plants because of the high risk of bringing in new people and even finding people to work in the plants. I believe Spain especially faces many of the same dangers as the US. They're growing rapidly in Europe. They're becoming the new center of production in Europe. I think you can be lulled into a false sense of security by the past year's prices due to exports to China. So there's a large overproduction risk which looms over countries which are expanding now into this market opportunity, largely because we know that China, once US production comes back, not only they're buying record numbers of animals, or at least tonnage of meat now from the US, but when that happens, China will have several markets to be able to purchase the pork meat needs that they have from, and they will use that to very rationally to lower the price from those who have had extreme high prices earlier. So not to be harsh with my Spanish colleagues, but there's a lot of the same, I think, mentality that's in the US. We have to keep production a little below or at processing capacity to return profits to production settings. I think we're going to see more focus on closed systems of production to try to push risk outside. So it's really one of the only effective ways to mitigate, not eliminate risk. We're all very well trained in biosecurity for diseases, common diseases like PRRS and others. Now we have these additional challenges of human sickness, as well as the scourge of African swine fever, which is still moving around in Europe, especially Poland, and in the wild boar population, but also a continuing major problem in Chinese production. So, and as well as close by countries, Vietnam and others. So the only way, unfortunately, to reduce the risk of interjection of those disease issues into these very expensive production and processing systems is to begin to gain more control and to, in a sense, begin to close them down some. So I see really the reinvention of traceability techniques, which were invented first to assure consumers of safety and quality and traceability of a problem should it arise in vegetables or meat or whatever. This has been going on and developing for the last 20 years, but there's going to be a new focus on traceability-like systems for biosecurity rather than only for consumer information. So I think we're going to see the rise of probably blockchain techniques to secure information flow and transactions between related vendors and partners in the chain to assure or attempt to assure the lack of invasion by outside contaminations whether they be viruses or bacteria, diseases of both humans or animals. If you don't know about blockchain, I would encourage you to read up on it. We don't have time to go into it there. It's simply a secure information transfer system that can't be defrauded, basically. I don't want you to focus on the detail here, but if you look at the typical farrow to finish operation, which is in the purple here, we're seeing in the United States and have seen for a few years that production sector has reached into and integrated meat processing and slaughter operations. And they've done this in order to overcome the information barrier that occurs between the finishing phase of the live animal and the slaughtering operation. When those are separate businesses, there's a wall of information sharing so that perfect information is not, and all information is not shared across that border, but the potential for profitability rises dramatically, as well as control of the system against these kinds of problems if the production sector also owns or co-owns the slaughter and meat processing. So all of the big new plants in the United States in the last few years have been in this model of large production systems now producing large slaughter and meat processing operations that are under their ownership or control. Hardening the full chain to consumers is going to take place, as well as these increases in flexibility. So we have to see a tremendous increase in the way food flexibility increase in the way food is moved from production processing to the final consumer. So if you have a fast food like McDonald's or others in your immediate area, you probably have seen that, at least in many countries, they moved to a model now where you can go on the internet with their app, you can order what you want, you can also then choose how you want it delivered to you. You can choose to go get it through the window. You can choose to meet in a specified place in the parking lot and someone will hand it to you or put it into your car. Or you can, they've aligned with delivery companies to have it literally delivered to your door. So you see in that process, they've introduced flexibility into the system to be able to move food to you in various different ways depending on what the challenge is. We need to see more of that innovation, and we'll see more of that innovation back through the chain. In the United States, and I'm sure in Europe and other places in the world, one of the biggest problems that happened during the COVID problem were that people were quarantined and told not to go to restaurants or to go out. And so suddenly all of the meat chain, which was focused on restaurant food production, had nowhere to go with their food. So unfortunately, most of the time they have large bags of food which are not really customer ready or can't be sold to customers. 30 gallons of eggs in a big bag that have been pasteurized. It would be all that I could do to eat that in a couple of years probably. I certainly can't buy 30 gallons of eggs. So there's going to be a lot of rethinking of how food is delivered in a more flexible way so that chains can adjust. We already see an explosion of direct consumer marketing over the web, where the food is literally delivered directly out of an app or in refrigerated packages or refrigerated systems. We see a lot of internet ordering and distribution channels bringing not only food but other products directly to the door. And we're really seeing a rise of in the meat substitutes now, which have traditionally been more expensive than pork, poultry, or beef. But because of the structural increase in prices in meat now, and necessary because of these disruptions and to create these new models. Now there is very little price difference between the meat substitute items and regular meat. So I think we have to face the fact that the millennial generation, which is coming on, and its equivalent around the world and other cultures, is going to have a very different demand than the big group of people who are now passing away and into retirement that arose after the Second World War. So there's going to be a big demand shift, a more openness to meat substitutes, and technology is making them so that they taste more and more like, with textures as well as taste actual meat products. China now, and my last kind of topic here before we take questions, China is going to dominate the future in the global pork industry for many years due to several different influences that it's going to have. Number one, it has ongoing supply issues due to the difficulty in controlling completely African swine fever and its emergence. They also have layered challenges now to domestic demand, because in the first time in decades, really, they're in a recession. They're not growing because of the COVID problem and other issues. So there's less demand within China for higher quality cuts of meat and for durable goods. People are doing maintenance and keeping things that they have now. So the demand in China has been greatly curtailed. The export demand from China has been dramatically reduced because of COVID. People are not shopping and buying as much as before. And the trade issues and tariffs with the United States have also layered into that. And China just turns out to be kind of the genesis of these novel viruses because of its location, climate, and the animals and human interactions which take place there. So we may be able to expect more of that. We certainly do seasonally with the influenza, but now we see that other human viruses can also arise from that area of the world. Then we have global political investment and aspirations. So the political movements by China are all going to combine here to be maybe the second biggest influence on the market outside of these pandemics. So it's not that China necessarily will control the global market, but things China does and that happen to China are going to spin off into the world and greatly affect the world meat industry and especially the pork industry. So if you look, this is a graph of prices in China, which is from Pig 333. So we'll give them another plug. We'll end with a little look at what we think is going to happen in China. You can see from 2013 kind of almost to the present till at least 2018, the prices in China followed between that dotted black band, a very predictable seasonal and cyclical process, just like they do in the US and Europe and other countries. And then suddenly in August of 2018, where the star appears, the outbreak of African swine fever occurred. And the initial response in China was a liquidation, which for many months lowered the price of pork because all of these pigs were coming to market quickly, hopefully before they could get affected by the virus and be disqualified for marketing. So many firms were just pushing pigs into the slaughterhouses as fast as possible. And many around the world thought that prices would rise immediately, but they didn't take into account the big liquidation, which took place over many months. You can see there before finally in March or April of 2019, several months later, we had the liquidation over and this giant spike in prices occurs. Now, I'm going to give you a little model quickly of how to understand what's going on with ASF in China without necessarily going there or listening to a local person who happened to visit there or something. You can watch the market price and tell. And here's how we can do that with a quick model. We know that in all of pork production, we saw this very regular pattern in China between those two dotted lines before. We have an expansion phase in green with rising prices. Too much is produced, then prices begin to fall. When they get low enough, people begin to sell their breeding stock, more low prices. And then when prices get low enough and supply is low enough, prices are begin to be bid up, and we have an expansion phase. So very quickly, I'm going to show you a model that Lance and I put together to try to understand that. We know that, and has been for many months, a big repopulation attempt in China as things are cleaned up and sites are becoming more secure and under new rules. There are two key factors that determine whether that's going to be success. People's willingness to invest, and may I say, every indication is there is a massive investment in the industry now, even by new players in China. Just like, for instance, in Mexico, where many people who own swine also own other major businesses in urban areas, large, successful business people in China are trying to get into the pig business, as well as those who are already in it. And then the success or failure of those repopulations or new farms. So how do people view the situation? Jump in or wait and see what happens, or jump in successful, jump in failure, wait, then jump in success or failure. So we modeled this with the stochastic process, and we really put two scenarios up. This is the number of repopulations over months, okay? So if there's optimism that they'll be successful, we'll see a lot of early re-entry into repopulations trailing off as the supply stabilizes. If people are scared of being wiped out again by African swine fever, we may see a more cautious approach where we wait for early adopters to get back in to see if they're successful, and the rest of people coming in late when they feel like the situation is stabilized. So these are the two possibilities that are likely to happen. And then with each of those possibilities, we have the another set of outcomes. Will they be successful or not? So we modeled 3 different levels of success. Very successful, no delay, able to get production going again. Moderately successful, that's the P there. They have to repopulate maybe once or so. And then catastrophic, extensive delays and frequent repopulation because the disease is not under control. So we've given 2 scenarios that are sort of mirror opposites. First scenario is the majority is successful, with 30% problematic and only 10% catastrophic. And then the second scenario is the disaster one, only 10% successful, still 30% kind of complicated or some repopulation, and 60% of that unsuccessful. And we can look at those distributions very quickly vertically here. Scenario 1, remember, was the basically the successful one. So in early months, there's a lot of success, then some complication, and very few taking over 2 years or several months to get successfully repopulated. Then we see the mirror opposite, where we have very few at the bottom, which are successful. In the middle, the typical some repopulation, and at the top of the screen in scenario 2, the big extensive 28 to 34 months from initial tries when success finally begins to happen. So now we can look at these, one with low catastrophic or high catastrophic, similar with kind of basic repopulation, working a little bit, some repopulation. And then the successful ones, either largely successful or not very successful. We can combine now these elements into sort of a grid. And we see that if we have early adopters that are unsuccessful, we can have late adopters which are unsuccessful, or early reentry, which is successful, or late reentry, which is successful. and that's simply the pairwise combination of these. So we can see what that looks like. Now, even though this graph, translators, this will be very important, even though these graphs are showing the return of production, they will also mirror the return in price. So if production is successful, we'll see a decrease in price as pig production comes on. If production is not successful, prices will remain high. So this is the pattern for late entry, but not successful. This is the pattern in production if we have people coming in because of the extreme high prices and being successful at repopulating China. Or here's the late entry where people are more skeptical, but when they do get in, they wind up being successful. So think about and sort of memorize those patterns, and then we ask, what's happening, especially in these very high prices? Well, we're seeing a little bit of a mixed message there. We have very high prices, which means production has not returned to normal, but we see it declining. So if you see it declining for a while and it keeps coming down, then we know that African swine fever strategies are working to get rid of it or to keep it out of large systems. If we see it come down and it has a couple of humps or bumps in it, then we know that some early attempts have been successful or unsuccessful and they've had to repopulate. So watch the prices and you'll be able to know what's happening in China without necessarily going there. So lastly, we wanted to say this is the pattern we hope for. It will reduce risk, it will be less costly, and it will give a quick return to normal retail prices and stabilize the global world, really, at least in terms of the African swine fever issue. So we want to thank you very much, our sponsor, Pig 333, and the training programs there, and from Lance and myself, we're very happy you chose to attend, and now we'll take questions. I think it was mentioned also that Lance is my son-in-law. My daughter went out into the world and found an economist, which myself, I rarely meet an economist, never meet an economist. But she went out and found one and married him, and he's from a farm background, loves our work, is a big modeler, and we're celebrating very soon our 5th year together as business partners. Questions?
Thanks, Dennis. It has been a really, really nice presentation. Thank you for the time you have taken to prepare it. So let's go for some questions. You can hear me okay, right?
I can.
Okay, so let's go with the first one. You have, I'm going to, sorry for that, because I'm getting the questions in English and Spanish, and I'm translating them in the moment. So I will try to do my best. So the first one is that you have been talking that one of the expectations in the pork in the production market will be a reduction in the workers in the systems. Okay, so the question is, do you think this will happen as well in these areas in the world where the cost of these workers is not really like in Europe or like in US, so for example Latin America or Eastern Asia or whatever?
I think it will happen there, but at a slower rate. And the reason is, even though we have in many areas of the world a large availability of people, pig production is going to become more sophisticated. And so it's not a matter of just pushing in a new person with no training if someone gets sick. That kind of thing is not going to be possible in the next 5 years, or not nearly as possible. So the problem that we didn't anticipate in this is the human illness. So not only does the human illness, COVID, cause a mass exodus of workers from a unit, leaving the pigs unattended potentially in many cases, or a feed mill unable to produce feed because people are sick with the next version of it, whatever that happens to be, or even this one when it comes back around in the next year. So normally we'd say, well, if somebody quits, we have a new supply easy. But if somebody is sick or they are bringing diseases to the pigs, which is a very possibility in the future, a big possibility in the future, then we see that the human vector is needing to be reduced in order to stabilize the production sector. So even in areas of low cost labor, I think we're going to see a reduction, but at a slower rate than in highly developed countries of human inputs.
Okay, perfect. Let's go.
Primarily because of human disease risk and the risk of them being a vector of disease into the animals.
Okay, perfect. Let's go with the next one. It's how will be, under your view, the main and stronger pork meat producer in Europe?
Well, certainly Spain is emerging for all of the right reasons, for being the big producer in Europe. Number one, they have the right climate for year-round pig production. They have the production of small grains available. They have lots of land, which is not in heavy use by other urbanization and that sort of thing. They have great infrastructure and ports, and to a certain extent, although it doesn't offer perfect protection, the Iberian Peninsula is kind of pushed away from Europe and is the farthest, by land at least, for the migration of African swine fever if it does break into Germany and Denmark and then move across the continent. You have the Pyrenees Mountains as kind of a natural barrier to the rest of Europe for disease control. Now, African swine fever comes on cruise ship garbage and is brought in by tourists who are bringing a cut of pork to have a traditional meal in Spain, and their relatives in Romania or Poland who have a family farm, and they come and it's not checked. So, okay, it comes in many ways, but they do have certain natural isolation and protection from many diseases. The Mediterranean and the Pyrenees form some protection there. They also have great universities, especially in Barcelona, great veterinary training, and a high interest in pork production. They have quite an ability to use the manure nutrients too, which is one of the biggest problems facing the traditional areas north in Europe, like Denmark and Germany and so forth. I think Italy will be a big player, but in specialty pork, the big pigs will be high value products. Italy is not a great place for the kind of expansion of production that we see in Spain for many reasons.
Yeah, it's a more specific market for sure, Italy. So different one.
A high value market.
Okay, let's go to another one. I think we have two of them that are pretty similar, that are talking about China. So let's say they ask, how many years do you think that China will need to recover his production to be near the 2018 levels.
I gotta find my crystal ball. Where did I leave my crystal ball? Oh, I don't have it, but let me take a guess anyway. This is a long story, but I'll make it short because I know we have don't have much time. But I believe, just from my opinion and interpretation of what happened in China, is China became a victim of something that normally is a huge benefit. So developing countries like China, like India, even like Brazil to a large extent, they've been able to what's called leapfrog many of the developed countries' technology and go from where they were 50 years ago to ultra modern technology without going through all the steps in the middle. So for instance, they don't have to have telephone lines everywhere if they adopt cellular only. Whereas telephone lines had to be built all over Europe, all over the United States, the hard lines and the poles and all of that. If you come along after these technologies have advanced, you can jump from where you're at over these investments to the most modern ones. Well, they did that in many ways. They have a tremendously modern infrastructure, they brand new airports, brand new urban areas, rapid transit trains, an explosion of airline companies and travel, certainly huge technology and manufacturing technology jump. But when the mega production of very modern hog operations developed, they had to grow using backward elements of the society which were not hardened against this kind of invasion. So the lack of labs, the lack of ability to monitor rail transportation of quality of grain, the disaggregated movement of pigs throughout the country, because when all of these firms started, almost all of the large firms that started were not integrated through a packing plant. They had it in mind for later, but they began to use existing poor quality farms as places to put pigs temporarily, and then they were selling to middlemen, merchant middlemen, and others who were then delivering pigs to plants all over the country. And as that happened, it became the perfect spread mechanism for a catastrophic disease. And it appears like ASF came in on feed, on rail, and then when it got into the country, it spread dramatically because you had a mix of very modern with very primitive systems, and the primitive systems allowed the disease to move around. So what we're seeing, I think, now is a reinvestment in closed systems which are trying to greatly restrict the flow of feed and animals, all new rules about monitoring and protecting. In many farms in China, you literally have to move through a fence now and live in a set of apartments for several days before you're allowed into the inner sanctum where the animals are to decontaminate. So the problem is not everybody is going to make the same wise choices at the same time. Some people will try to make a quick investment and skirt the system and will keep a level of the infection going. They would do this in any country in the world, typically. It's just human nature. So I think it's going to be more a slow, plodding process with many setbacks that are temporary, and probably be up to 10 years before it's relatively safe throughout the pig production areas of China to make what I would call a safe investment. Otherwise, you're going to have to make reinvestment after reinvestment over periods of time to control and manage the re-entry of the disease. By then, we'll probably have a new disease. So, you know, this is the nature of things now. The black swans keep coming and keep coming. That's why I say things like traceability, hardened blockchain controlled information and characteristic systems, and highly co-invested systems, so that one element of the chain doesn't suffer huge catastrophic losses while another part of the chain is immune from. So if it's shared by ownership, then losses in one place are just as important as gains in another, and there's attention paid to doing the whole system right. That's another 1 hour presentation, but you got that in 4 minutes. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Let's go. I think we have like 3 last questions. We will try to answer, and we don't want to extend a lot the webinar, but now you are here, and we need to take you close. So
no problem. I don't want to be boring for others, though. If you need to do something else.
Perfect. One question, mainly from North America, and they are asking how dramatic, how severe the industry consolidation you have been talking about will be, in your opinion.
Well, I almost think there isn't any choice now. Now, it may be creative. It may not be what you're thinking of as traditional integration, which is you just have to give up if you're a producer and allow large companies to take over the whole process. But it's going to be more co-invested and coordinated because I have talked to too many independent producers in the last month who are in tragic situations. And what happens is capital won't be available anymore to those kinds of risks. So that doesn't mean you have to leave necessarily, but it means innovation of structure and risk sharing has to take place. And, you know, it's just as dangerous economically to be fully integrated under single control as it is to be fully independent. And we've seen that. It's the domino problem. If one piece of the integrated chain fails, there's no flexibility. It drives everything out. And many of these chains are publicly traded, and you know that goes. The stock market looks at what have you done for me in the last quarter. So again, money is cut off, or reinvestment is cut off. So I think what we're going to see is a more risks shared, ownership shared, but modular system developed, so that the so-called independent producer doesn't shoulder the full risk while making the biggest investment, but the integrated firm doesn't make the mistake of being rigidly fully integrated, because they face the same risk of destruction that the independent does. So a new thing is coming, and I think it's going to be exciting, and it's going to offer opportunities for flexibly more sustainable, long run, less variant profits as it becomes established.
Okay, thanks. Let's go with another one. We are talking now we are doing, it's just like an introduction, Dennis, maybe you don't know it, but we are talking a lot now as well here in Spain about the image of the pig production sector, how the people see us. And in this direction, we have a question from Julian Redondo. So that is, now that you are here, it's asking about if you have the same problems in US, or if you have problems in US right now with groups or people against farms, and how that, or if you think that that could impact in the market, in the market in some way.
Yes, and let me say that I've been to many countries in the world, and I have never been to a country that I didn't love visiting the people and the food, but I've been to Spain a disproportionately large number of times. And I can think of twice walking through Barcelona when animal activists staged a major demonstration in a square I was passing through, falling down, spilling red paint. So I know there is a very active in Spain anti-animal production process going on. It's part of that shift that I talked about earlier between where the millennial generation is taking over from people my age and older. So yes, video has escaped into the public in the US of the euthanasia process of a large number of hogs in the US. An activist filmed the euthanizing process of the animals in a large barn. It was not, it was a sickening sight to see. And it was sickening for the producer to do as well as to see. But they were using what I believe was an approved method, but it leaves a bad impression in the public, and the public is changing. So this is why I think this flexibility piece is coming, with not large number of animals concentrated in a very small region or a very small production setting in terms of geography, and the protection of the animals and the humans is going to have to be stepped up, because otherwise we'll move more and more to unacceptable. The key places which economically can produce pigs out in an outstanding way, like Spain, will be closed or closed down or dramatically reduced. The same in the U.S. But innovation to protect pigs and people is going to have to come, so we don't have these tragic kinds of outcomes.
Okay. And let's go fast with the last two we are going to read today. We have more, but I will cut here. So sorry if I leave someone without answer, but it's we are a lot of people here, and we need to be.
We'll do a lightning round. We'll do lightning round. I'll answer very quickly.
Yeah. So this is a really close question that is asking about, Carmina Samper is asking about pork meat consumption is going up or is going down in the prompt future. What is your opinion about that?
I think it's going to be going down on a per capita basis. That is going to be a little bit different region by region, but I think in general, for somebody who's in their 20s or 30s and is entering this industry, by the time they're my age, I think there's going to be dramatic reductions in consumption of pork meat, as well as beef and poultry. Not eliminated, certainly not eliminated, but I know there are a lot of people who are naturally biased against it, but I went out and tasted the so-called fake meat in various different forms, and it used to be a joke, an absolute nasty joke to try fake meat. It really isn't a nasty joke anymore. They've perfected the texture to a large degree, and they're able to produce many of the flavors, and you're going to see huge growth in that. We saw today in the meat news, one of the largest, not a McDonald's, but one of the largest fast food chains in the United States has added another sandwich in this artificial meat variety. So they're clearly expanding into fast food, and the health of it is not very good right now necessarily. At least I don't know that of my own self, but that's the criticism of it. So in other words, it is still high fat and very processed is the criticism of it. But all those processes change and develop and innovate. So they're working on that now too. And I think there's much more investment right now in the displacement of meat than there is in the modernization of meat production. So investment's going to win out, I think.
All right. And the last one, I promise. So it's the last one is asking if Russia will be able to export to China if Russia gets the capacity to export to China. It's going to be a really a strong competitor like an exporter.
Well, certainly there are a huge number of factors which would say that this could be a good idea. All right. There is proximity, there is developed railways, there's massive grain production areas near China, and there's growing modern sized pig production. The problem Russia has is the same one China has, though, and that is those things are developing with high technology, but surrounding them and supporting modern pig production in Russia are systems that aren't as flexible, aren't as well developed. And I think China is going to be needing lots of assurance that there is a well-controlled and safe process in Russia before they introduce large amounts of meat there. All the elements are there to make it happen, but the key supporting infrastructure still needs to be developed. Sorry about the hands, but I'm Italian. What can I say? Go everywhere.
Okay, perfect, Denis. So I think we are going to finish here. So it has been a really a pleasure to have you here for this this webinar. I hope to do something similar in some point to see how all these predictions you have put on the table today are developing, so we can continue discussing. And of course, the market is always alive, so things can happen and can change. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you to everyone to be here. Again, it's a pleasure from Traceability to have all of you in this webinar. And I leave to you the last words, Denis, and we will close the webinar. Thank you, everyone.
I want to thank everyone for coming to and staying as long as you have. And let me say that there's an old saying that says, if you forecast, make sure you forecast often. And that will apply to me too. So we'll have to do some of these some more so we can modify these forecasts. Thank you again, and best wishes to everyone out there that you can overcome these things quickly.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.